everyone. Thank you so much for attending my session, and thank you for Stanford CME for inviting me to share. I've enjoyed the conference so far. I hope you guys have too. Recently, this morning, I got to hear from Gary Lipowitz, who's the CEO at Vyond, and it's great, a little like serendipitous moment because a lot of the content that I'll be presenting today uses Vyond as a tool. And funnily enough, he also spoke about utilizing AI with the development of um, talking heads and how we can reapproach how we're using that asset. And I think my presentation is going to be doing that in part, is giving you a little bit of a case study to see how we can utilize AI generated content and make those talking heads a little bit more approachable with a little bit more humanity. So to start us off, I'd love to know in the chat, in the QA section, who here enjoys Marvel movies, who has seen maybe the latest Deadpool movie. I'll wait for like 30 seconds to see what comes up in the chat. All right, so it looks like um, a couple people are responding. It looks like, oh, okay, no, never mind. Nothing yet. It's come up. It's all right. I'll continue going. I recently saw the Deadpool and Wolverine movie, and I wanted to highlight something that Deadpool actually says in the movie to Wolverine. So it's not a spoiler, but he does say, "Welcome to the MCU. You're joining at a bit of a low point." And I want to do that as a preface because I do reference Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I recognize that Marvel Cinematic Universe has started to lose a little bit of traction with its audience for having convoluted, interconnected storylines. But I'm wanting just to pose and think about how Marvel's MCU, Marvel Cinematic Universe, can be a North Star for us as learning professionals, and how we can think about how they do a really fantastic job of branching narratives and using interconnected storylines to make meaning and to build engagement with audiences. A little bit of an introduction. My name's Abby Johnson. I work as an instructional designer at EarnIn. But the content that I'll be talking about today comes from, as a case study, it comes from my work at SES Engineers. So you'll see that branding a little bit throughout the presentation. When I first entered instructional design as a role from a high school teaching perspective background, I did not intend or think even about creating a cinematic universe out of learning content. But it kind of ended up naturally occurring, and I want to share that story. And I believe that it can be used as a framework for you with your learning content. So that's what I'll be presenting on today. Because it naturally occurred, I had to think about why it was successful. And I think about these 3 points that are on the screen right now. The first one is connected to the research on story design and scenario-based training. We see the influence and success of people utilizing the work of folks like Rance Green or Hadiya Nuruddin in the development of story-based training. The second point as to why I think I'm presenting today, even on this topic, and why the Cinematic Universe framework is an interesting one, is because of my team's desire to provide my company, SCS Engineers at the time, with more engaging and more effective training. We wanted to focus on addressing knowledge gaps and skill development and desired attitude changes and direct our training at those versus just training for quote unquote understanding content. And so that's another reason as to why I'm presenting today. The last one is a positive reaction from my colleagues, seeing this new type of training, seeing this new development as I was building at the cinematic universe and realizing that like, hey, this can actually be something that other folks in learning and development spaces can use. So overall, in my presentation, my hope for us today is that we'll be able to talk about creating a cinematic universe for a learning context that can be a strategic framework for diminishing design choice paralysis, optimizing your departmental resources, and harnessing the power of storytelling for your learners. So I'm going to start a little bit talking about the context of SCS engineers and my time there. SCS Engineers is an environmental engineering firm. It its basic business model is creating projects or working on projects that would fix pollution. It did a lot of work on landfill remediation. And the reason why I share that is we had employees that were across the country. There wasn't anybody that was in one dedicated office. And so because of that, I used a lot of e-learning as the like mode for providing content at that company. And so as I was working through develop the e-learning courses and looking at the learning pathways during one particular audit of compliance training, I saw a lot of, unfortunately, I saw a lot of standalone read and click training. And I realized that something had to be done on that front. But I also noticed that a lot of the main objectives of that point and click or read and click training was that they were trying to get our learners to be quote unquote aware of workplace issues. And as we know in learning and development, if we don't have specific learning objectives that target uh, higher level of Bloom's taxonomy, you're not going to have a whole lot of engagement, and it's not going to be as effective as you want it to be. So knowing that, my manager and I on the team, we were thinking about ways that we could better engage our learners. And at the same time of auditing our compliance training, we were working with and learning about a new tool in our toolbox. We started utilizing Vyond. And if you don't know about Vyond or you've never used it before, it's a cloud-based animation video content development slash editor that has quite a bit of generative AI functionality and is continuing to develop on that. So because I was responsible for redeveloping and reviewing our pathways, instead of writing out these long lists of content, like listicles of content, or really text heavy paragraphs, I wanted to leverage Vyond's capability and use some of these animated characters as talking heads or narrators. The first character that I created, first two, was myself and my manager. We started assigning these new characters in a redesigned in our redesigned pathways in the LMS. And my colleagues started recognizing me as a virtual avatar. And so I decided like, oh, like I might as well just keep on using myself um, and keep on providing and delivering on safety content and creating scenarios just using myself. I got some really good positive feedback on that. And so I realized, like, why can't I like create more and more characters, make this a little bit bigger, see if we have the same engagement. And so I realized as I was doing that, our characters started having lives of their own, having personalities of their own. And it became easier and easier to interweave and connect our characters' experiences in training with the lives of our employees. We saw a synchronicity of our Vyond characters' development and the learning pathways. So a couple of examples of this type of training I was creating. In a slip, trip, and falls training, I utilized a new character, Jerry, and Jerry fell in the office break room because somebody didn't clean up after a spilled smoothie. And then in another training, safe observation training, I created Norma and Sarah. And Norma is scolding Sarah because she didn't pay enough attention to the communal microwave burning her popcorn. And then I created a manager training, and Austin was asking questions to his manager, Cheryl, and learning more about the on the job training and knowledge that he needed to work on brownfields. And after months of course development and auditing and iterating, finally we saw some of these characters come together. Jerry, Norma, and Sarah were starting to now work together to support their manager in helping him identify unsafe working practices in the office. And it got to a point even where I introduced guest speakers. So Patrick Lencioni stopped by and reflected on his book, Working Geniuses with Austin. Again, this is all to say, and it looks like a lot of work, but I didn't intend initially to build out an entire cinematic universe of characters and training at SCS Engineers. And as I reflect on that development, I realized that I didn't do it alone. I was influenced by a couple of different people and a couple of different organizations. Obviously, the first one is Marvel Studios. Um, they are very, very successful ever since starting the Marvel Cinematic Universe in 2008 with Iron Man. They've released more than 30 films and they have a very, very high worldwide box office revenue at almost $30 billion. Obviously, my team and I would never have seen that kind of revenue working in learning, utilizing our own cinematic universe, but it gave us a North Star. It gave us an idea to think about the power of using unique characters and seeing them develop across a series of assets, across a series of um, courses within learning pathways. Part of the reason for, I think, why Marvel is successful as well is they really understand character development and struggle. And so, for example, we see Thor learning what it means to be a superhero and coming into his own after struggling with mental health. And I think it's interesting. We love in stories to support the underdog. We love to learn about the struggle, but I think we love even more supporting people in their development and in seeing that growth through our support. And so it was really exciting to utilize this in a learning context and see our colleagues succeed. But it's really difficult to create those branching narratives. So another influence I used in my development was, again, the learning experts, Hadia Nureddin, Brant Green, and their work on rethinking about training and utilizing storytelling in that training. So here's a quote from Hadia Nureddin's book, Story Training. She writes, "A story is a set of connected events, each caused or influenced by the one that came before it. The causal relationships among the events add a forward momentum to the story, which is the secret to compelling the listener to hang on. These connected events lead to change, which is typically the point of the story, but the change needs to be earned for the listener to get invested. Even if we create one character, we need to see them keep on popping up throughout the training and have their experiences match the conflicts that our learners are facing, because then we'll start to see the characters become more recognizable by our learners. And then inevitably, the content that is leveraged by these stories becomes more memorable. But coming up with a story and the scenario is difficult if we don't, again, think about the learners in mind and we don't do a solid needs analysis. So I started interviewing SMEs, making sure that I understood their challenges in connection with the pathways we were reviewing. And this is just an example of the courses that we were looking at, the performance objectives that we wanted to match, and then underneath it, I started adding the characters that we would use throughout the training and see how they developed. So this character specifically is Sarah, and in her development, as she becomes more aware of how to work on a team and how to build up a team, and the conflicts that come with interviewing and looking for new teammates. So again, we can start with just one character and then build up a organized, interconnected set of stories. Another helpful resource comes from Cami Beans, the accidental instructional designer. She summarized the work of France Green and Hadia Nureddin into a really helpful chart that matches the knowledge, skills, and attitude problems with the type of stories that would help fill in the missing gaps for our learners. The final inspiration in my development of a cinematic universe actually came from the economic need to save myself time in development. I could have created individual Vyond courses, individual Vyond videos and kept them separate from the course assets I was working on. And I didn't have to necessarily connect the courses or reuse characters. But I realized as I was reusing character assets in video production, just using my own virtual avatar, it became a lot easier for me to rethink some of the design choices I was making. I could recycle and reuse and repurpose some of the characters. And Vyond does a really great job of creating a library in which you can save some of those characters and even save some of the assets as well for background scenery. So I'll show you. Here's Sarah again. You can reuse in developing a cinematic universe. You can reuse characters. You can pre-build scenes. and really just making sure that we're introducing one relatable character whose knowledge, lack of knowledge, need for skill development, or desire connects with and mimics the perspective of our learners. So start small, take that character, see what they're learning, and continue to create content that helps them learn as our learners are learning. Here's a framework that I created. It's an equation to help us understand how we can rethink about cinematic universes and why they're helpful. So, a cinematic universe um, of learning experiences takes what makes a good story, the relatable characters, a strong conflict, and human nature's desire to find resolution, and then exponentially increase that strength of a story with interweaving storylines that we can implement in our learning pathways, and the use of AI, creating characters with uh, easy tools like Vyond to apply into our development process as we rethink and audit our courses. So here's a little bit of a practice example that we can use. I'll give you about 30 seconds on this next slide to take a screenshot if you'd like, or write it down in your notebooks if you have them out. This is the template that I used when I first started creating characters to implement into our cinematic universe. So you'll notice headshot and outfit. Those sections are meant for photos. You can basically take screenshots from Vyond and then put them into the template for remembering what you've used. The name will just be the name of the character. The AI voice will be what text to speech voice you'd like to use. That's been getting better and better as this technology has developed. The role is basically just the title that your company would use for a character. Characteristics are what makes them motivated to get up in the morning. What are some of the characteristics that could be used to explain some of the animation that you're implementing in your videos, some of the design choices as far as like what outfits they're wearing that could go into characteristics as well. Um, Background, what have they learned in the past? What are they wanting to learn in their role? And then the courses that they're already featured in. What have you already used as far as your learning pathways? What have you already used in courses prior? So I'll give you an example and then we'll go into some of the tips. This is Mohammed. I created him to kind of towards the start of our health and safety training when we were developing it. Um, and you'll notice in the background, I made a reference to a resume. I ended up taking at our company, we had an employee database of resumes, and I ended up doing some user research and I created a resume for Mohammed so I would know this is one, it's super connected to the character, or sorry, super connected to our learners. And then two, I can see where he potentially would want to grow professionally, what he already knows as well. Um, Obviously this is fictitious resume. And I actually didn't need to use ChatGPT to create some of these pieces of content. I just basically hodgepodged resources, the resumes that we already had. So before I end, I want to give you a couple of tips as you're building out these characters and the start of your cinematic universe. Tip one, those job titles, you want to make sure that those are kept as general as possible because you don't know the changes that your org might have regarding titles or their categorization. And you might not even have from your HR team, you might not know potentially the progression of titles. It's really great if you do, but you want to make sure that any title that you give a character is going to mesh with, or at least closely match, but not exactly match with your learners. Second point, make sure that your characters are relatable to your audience. You don't want to have any characters that you feel like don't have connection with the learners. So try to mimic what you see in the workplace and what you see surrounding your work environment. Be also realistic as far as the type of speech that they use. You don't want to give them super formal versus or super slang type voices as far as the way that they're presenting the information. You want to make it believable. don't limit or limit, sorry, limit how many characters you have within a single training. It's inevitably super difficult on a development perspective to have more characters in a training because then you have to make sure that all the strengths connect and the character development connects. So it's I would recommend maybe one or two characters to use starting out, and then maybe building up as you start to build out a base of understanding for those characters in development. And then the last one is just keep a record of the characters and their journeys. Um, so, for example, just keep a record of these type of documents uh, because you do want to make sure that the this information is shared across your team. I do see an attendee question, what is the website for Vyond? So it is Vyond, um, and it looks like www.vyond.com. That's right. I believe that's maybe the link for the plans. So you can, I think you can get a free trial as well to test out some of that capability. It is minimal comparatively to the business use, but for starting out, it's a good way to test out some of their generative AI features. Um, and so I'm going to give you a couple more resources as well, but not only is it helpful as far as keeping a record of those characters, but it's also helpful to keep a record of their journey. So I would recommend creating a template like this and then creating a template like this where you connect the courses that you have, their performance objectives, and then brainstorm with your team on how you see characters develop throughout those courses as well. It would be remiss not to provide the texts that I've read on this topic. And so checking out Cami Bean, France Green, and Hadia Nuruddin's texts will help you rethink about those characters and how to basically engage with your higher upper management on utilizing story-based training. And so I'd love to connect with folks. That's my name, that's my email. If you'd like it, we can chat more. If you have any cinematic universe framework, story questions, story-based training questions, and then I just put a little photo of my dog, Harriet. She's an English bulldog. And for my teacher background, her name's Harriet because of really important women in history, Harriet Tubman, Harriet Beecher Stowe. I do see a question in the chat. How do we ensure that we stay away from stereotypes? And that is a big question because I think oftentimes in film, you do see reinterpretations of stereotypes, unfortunately. I think it's gotten a little bit better in mainstream media. Something I would think about is thinking about your learners. So using those user stories and making sure that any content that you implement within the videos is as close to the experiences of your learners as possible. Obviously, you wouldn't want to do a carbon copy of your learners because then it would be like, why did you use me in this video? I know exactly how to interview somebody. What the heck, learning? Why did you do that? But I would just make sure the easiest way to not sway into stereotypes is to be as truthful with your representation as possible. And then ask people for support if you need it. Make sure that whatever you've produced, it gets reviewed by upper management or your team to make sure that you're not falling into any pitfalls. So yeah, thank you all so much. I really do look forward to any type of communication in the future. I look forward to all the stories and characters that you share. And again, thank you so much to Innovate Ed, to Stanford, and then special shout out to Lonnie Matsumura for inviting me to talk this afternoon.